There's a lot of noise and media coverage recently around a report that's come out and said that the age you can access state pension will need to go up to 71. This all stems from this report. Today, we're going to go through the report and look at exactly what it does and doesn't say. And then I'll tell you my thoughts on this, suggest some ways that this can be fixed, and most importantly, what you can do to protect yourself and your retirement. Let's start with the report, published by Professor Les Mayhew.
I'm Les Mayhew.
He works at Bayes Business School, but is the head of global research at the International Longevity Centre UK. They are a think tank, and what they think about is the impact of longevity, aka everyone living longer, on countries around the world. This report in particular that's generated such a fuss focuses on the impacts of longevity on state pension. But really, this is a conversation about the old age dependency ratio, or OADR. We've spoken about this before. The dependency ratio is how many people who are above retirement age, 65 plus, are there versus how many people are working. The international definition of working age is between the ages of 15 and 65. Is 15 working age? It also doesn't include people who are economically inactive or those who work after 65. So yeah, it isn't perfect, but it looks to explain that broad relationship. The fact that it's called the dependency ratio is very telling. The state pension system in its current format is dependent on new people. There is no pot of money paying people's pensions. When you pay your taxes, you're paying for the pensions of people that are retired today. A Ponzi scheme is an investment fraud that pays existing investors with funds collected from new investors. The UK state pension is essentially a legalised Ponzi scheme. That's all okay, as long as the OADR stays at a healthy level where there are more people working than there are retired. But if we go to this report from the UK government, they have a graph that shows the problem that we face. This blue line plots the OADR over time, and right now we're about here. So for every 3 workers, we have a retired person. But look at what happens over time. The amount of retired people just keeps going up. The report from Les states that there are 20 countries currently at risk from hitting a ratio that means there's only 1 working person for every retired person by 2050. That is, of course, unsustainable. The quick fix is just to raise the state pension age. We see the impact that has on the chart here again with the orange lines. You raise the age and the ratio drops for a bit. And this sort of measure is nothing new. The pension age has been ticking up for a while now. Before 2010, a woman got state pension at the age of 60. A further increase to 68 is expected to be phased in between 2044 and 2046. However, more recent reviews suggest that actually we need to bring forward this increase to 2037 or 2039. And now this report is saying that that's not going to be enough either. And that if you're born after 1970, then you shouldn't be getting state pension until you're 71. 71 sounds really old, doesn't it? But it wouldn't be the first time that state pension age was at these levels. In 1908, the first state pension was introduced. You got 25p a week if you were age 70 or over. So actually, state pension then was higher than it is right now. Also, life expectancy then in 1908 was only about 50 to 55 years. So most people never got there. And if they did, they were only expected to live for another 9 years. Whereas today, most people are expected to get to retirement age, and most of those people are then expected to live for 20 years plus. State pension went from something that was only there for a handful of people, and they got it for a short time, to something that everyone expects to get for decades. This has meant the cost burden of the scheme has just become massive. The Office for Budget Responsibility estimated that last year pension benefits cost the government £136 billion. 124 of that is spent on state pension. That is around 12% of what we spend in total just on pensions. If we factor in healthcare costs as well, the total spend on an ageing population is a huge chunk of the UK budget. The stat now is that 50% of people are disabled by the age of 70. So while we might be living longer, for many these are decades of ill health. Ratcheting up the age that you can access state pension, people will say, well, you live longer anyway, so it doesn't matter. But it's about quality of life and mobility, not just the length. I want the money when I can use it. These population trends are global, it's happening all over the place. And it's a combination of extending life expectancies and declining birth rates in the West, as people either have less children or they wait longer to have those children. But in the UK, there's another elephant in the room, if you will, something that we need to discuss. I would show you the elephant, but the door to the room is sealed by a rather chunky
triple lock,
which uprates the state pension every year by either 1, the growth in average wages, 2, the rate of inflation, or 3, 2.5%, whichever is the largest.
On one hand, raising the pension amount in line with these metrics means those who rely on state pension to live don't starve. But it's a hell of a Werther's-sized pill to swallow to be told, The working population need to carry the burden of the triple lock, but also we can't afford this whole Ponzi scheme thing. So the age that you're going to get to see some of that action, we're going to keep moving that further and further away. There's a wider than moral debate here that we're not going to solve today. But what makes this whole mess much worse is the politics of it all. Pensions of all varieties, but especially the state pension, are used as a political tool to win votes.
We're absolutely committed to the triple lock.
If a population is ageing and more people are over the age of 65, it makes sense to look to that demographic to win votes. This type of thinking is short term, the intentions are selfish, but that's very much modern politics, isn't it? And this sort of approach fails to address the root issue, and then the problems just compound over time. The UK's 14 million Gen Xers save just £200 a month into their pension pots, on average. 1/3 of this group are at high risk of retiring with not enough income. Gen X are the people born between 1965 and 1980. So this is the next group to approach retirement age, and what we're saying is a large chunk of them don't have enough saved for retirement, which just piles more pressure on the generations behind them. So while this report is nothing more than a think piece, if the population continues to age, if the OADR rates continue to go the wrong way, and if the political system looks to appease their voting base short term by dishing out unsustainable increases in the amount of state pension people get, the only choice we will have will be to continue to move the goalposts further and further away. But does it need to be that way? In a moment, I'm going to tell you what you should be doing about this as an individual to, protect yourself from these measures and the uncertainty that exists around state pension. But let's just look at a couple of alternatives for the system first of all. Firstly, a major problem the UK has at the moment is the amount of working age people on long-term sickness. It is no coincidence that as the NHS declines, so does the health of the working population. There's around 3 million people of working age off on long-term sickness. That's around 10% of the entire workforce. Waiting times in the NHS are a joke. There are constantly stories of working age people literally dying in waiting rooms waiting for treatment. I had to wait 12 hours the other day for a brain scan after a head injury. And let's say that I did have a bleed on the brain, which is what they were looking for. I didn't, fortunately. But, if I just died in the waiting room, then my productive capacity and my tax revenue that I generate, that ends with me. But fixing the NHS is a problem as expensive and about as political as the pension issue. So what else have we got? If I was in charge, we would be but I would put forward a radical solution, one that would probably end my political career, as the other side would attack me as the guy who got rid of state pension. But this isn't my idea. It's been widely discussed before, but just hear me out. Let's say from today, any child that is born will never get a state pension. Instead, the government deposits £5,000 at birth into a pension for them. There are around 600,000 children born every year in the UK, so that would cost us about £3 billion a year to make that deposit. Nothing in comparison to the 125 billion and growing we spend on state pension. We burnt 4 billion quid's worth of PPE that wasn't fit for use. So that money then is invested in a low-cost global index fund, and the child can't touch it until they retire at 65. Let's say they get a pre-inflation return of 7% and that the government don't allow horrible fund companies to skim 1% off the top for nothing. By the time the child retires, that money would be worth around £466,000. That would produce them an income of about £19,000 a year based on a 4% withdrawal rate. But let's take this a bit further. If that 5k is invested for 20 years until the child starts work, at which point that pot of money is worth £20,000 and it becomes their auto-enrolment work pension. They pay into there and so does their employer, and they also get tax relief. And let's say they just do the average that a Gen Xer is doing at the minute, which is the £200 we talked about at the moment. In total, everything altogether. And they never increase it. They leave it as is for 45 years. They have 1.2 million that will produce them about 48k a year in retirement income. If the government wishes, they could recoup the £5,000 from a tax code, whatever, or from the pot itself when they access it. And within a generation, we would get rid of state pension altogether. Because the problem with our current system is all the work is done at the end, and we do not leverage the benefit of time and compounding to lighten the load. By planning for retirement at birth, the country lets time do the heavy lifting and reduces the bill massively. This plan is probably full of holes and someone will point them out, but our current system is even worse. And should we continue to pile more pressure on future generations, only increasing the problem for them? When we realise how much we owe to the heritage left by our forebears, it is shameful how short-term most decision-making is. Just with a little bit of long-term thinking and just a clear explanation to the UK public as to why we're changing things, we could lay the foundations for future generations to remove this noose from their neck. But this would take time to see benefits, and right now my priority is making sure that you're okay and that you have actionable steps to protect yourself in case this situation just doesn't get better. This sort of news points to the fact that the rules around pensions can change. If state pension age goes up, well, will they then increase the age that you can access your SIP or work-based scheme by more? It's already going from 55 to 57. And then what happens to public sector staff? Doctors, nurses, police, will they see the age that they can access their pensions manipulated as well? Be stuck in work until 70? Because of this uncertainty, it is imperative that you build assets that give you flexibility. A retirement is not just a pension, it's all of your assets. Maybe you downsize your home to free up some cash. Or my preferred option is a stocks and shares ISA, due to the flexibility, due to the fact that I can access the money whenever I want. So if I'm 60 or 55, whatever, I can go screw the rules. It doesn't matter when I'm going to get my pension. I'll live off my ISA for now until that pension becomes available. I keep a list of all of my favourite stocks and shares ISAs providers in the description of every single video. And while you're down there, you'll find this worksheet that I've made. It's a breakdown of most of the major work-based schemes, the auto-enrolment pensions that most of you will be in. I've been through them and covered off some of the fund choices that are available to help you really take ownership of your pension, to make sure you're maximising its potential. Because while this is just a think tank, it is clear that if you were born after 1970, you essentially cannot count on ever really getting a state pension. So you need to maximise the one that you do have. I made a whole video on this topic at the start of the year. I'll put it right here for you. Watch it next, because I look at this report that shows by being in the default funds at work, which around 90% of full-time staff are, this is costing the British public, millions of people, potentially up to £15,000 a year in retirement income.